AGA members, Chris Garlock back with Michael Redmond. Today we're going to look at the 32nd game in the AlphaGo self-play series. But first, as always, we want to give a big thanks to all of our wonderful AGA members. It's the support of those members that make these videos possible. And if you'd like to help, head on over to usgo.org and become an AGA member. Lots of other cool stuff there that you can check out on the website. And look forward to having you on board as members. All right, Michael, game 32. But first, well, by the time this is out, it'll be old news, I suppose. But at the moment that we're talking, you have some big news in Japan too.
Yeah, the Japanese news.
Yeah,
well, they're changing the name of the era, which is something they do in association with emperors. So when they get a new emperor, they usually change the name of the era. And so it's a two-letter word, two words fit together, usually taken from ancient Chinese, an Orthodox Chinese text, some classical text from ancient China. So they're going to have a new name because the emperor is stepping down. He didn't die this time. Usually the emperor goes on until he dies, but this time he decided he was too old to continue, and they allowed him to step down. So his son is going to become the new emperor.
So a couple things. Of course, people know that Michael's a big history fan of all history, not just Go history, although particularly Go history. This is, of course, Japanese history. First of all, the emperor, obviously, like the queen in England, is pretty much of a ceremonial position. No actual
he doesn't have any
power.
Actual power. No, yeah, but he does. Okay. He shows up at events and he meets with royalty overseas and stuff like that.
Right.
So he is, in a way, a kind of a diplomat, but he doesn't have any power as to himself.
And for folks who probably don't follow this sort of thing, and I'm not as up as I probably should be, but what can you tell us about the current emperor and the current era? For first of all, what is it called, the current era?
It was called Heisei, and it lasted for about 30 years. We're in a bit more than 30 years, 31, 32 years. And it was after his father, the Showa emperor, died. So that was the person who was the emperor when the World War II happened. So he was the one who got into trouble. And so this is his son who's stepping down. He's a very old man now, and he was middle-aged when he started being the emperor. Therefore, he was the crown prince up to that point.
Any particular highlights of his, I guess, reign, you would call it?
Well, he was, obviously, he was very centered on peace. And he was he was a professional botanist, I think. He had some knowledge of that. So he was doing some experiments with flowers and stuff and plants.
Okay.
But yeah. Don't press me anymore. I'm sort of at my limit at this point. Yeah.
The botanist emperor. I like it.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get into the area, of course, where you are a complete expert, which is Game 32. What's the story of Game 32?
Well, this is a game where Black played the mini Chinese opening. And you might recall in Game 31, we had the Chinese opening.
We did.
And I showed you a move that White played, that AlphaGo played as White, that has sort of stopped the popularity of the miniature, of the Chinese opening. It's a very similar move is going to be coming up in this game. And for the same reasons, it's reduced the popularity of the mini Chinese also. So it's the same thing, only the game is a bit more exciting in that, well, you're probably used to the idea at this point that the game there will be a lot of fighting, and then it's going to end up in a half-point difference or something like that.
Right. Standard.
But it's going to be a bit more drastic this time. It doesn't. Well, you're going to be a bit more worried, I think, about the life of some of them.
I am always worried. Always worried. Well, I tell you, that move I know the move you're talking about from the last game, and I'm still having nightmares about that move, so I can't wait to see what we've got here. All right, let's onward with Game 32.
You're going to see it in a more tactical position, actually, because it's a bit unusual. So we have a very typical mini Chinese opening starting here. Very the basic position, you might say. It's very easy to make this happen when white plays star points. But you can see that black did play the move one to the right. So this is the more modern version. And people were still sort of struggling to find a good name for it when people just stopped playing it after AlphaGo. So it's sort of in limbo now, you might say. So this is the point where, for instance, if white played here, we would if white played here, we would be talking about that move right now.
Right.
But that's not what white did. White played the 3-3 point. So this is a position where white would have played at C usually, or used to be the usual move. Actually, in this opening, when it was very popular, a lot of people were playing the Kakari at A also. And so A would be the most popular move before AlphaGo, and C was the move that was popular before that. And I marked B also because that became a fairly popular move at about that time also. So jumping into the 3-3 point, of course, is something that we thought was bad, so people weren't playing that. But of course, AlphaGo doesn't mind. So this is where I would suggest that white plays here.
Sure.
This is the move that I suggest, and black's probably going to play somewhere around here. This is, or it could be A or B. Black could play at A or B. I think black's probably going to play at A. That seems better balanced when white's played the slide. So this is the suggested move, and we've had this move before. It's not the first time, and I've always told you I don't really like it.
Yeah.
But it does depend on a ladder. For instance, if black pushes through, and again, it's a position where we saw this, I think it was in game 31 also.
That's right.
Where I told you that whichever side black cuts, white's going to take it. And so that's something that's worth remembering. And this way, it's just reverting to a different joseki where white gets the ponoki. So this is usually considered to be, unless there's a real good reason for black to want to take the corner territory, it's usually a slight advantage for white. Especially in the beginning of the game. This is a joseki that in professional games, you see this happening more often later in the game. When black has a reason, like black would want to make a life for that group in the corner, or doesn't have much use for an outside wall. So in this case, black would not want to do that. But black could push, oh, sorry, that was just a clickle. Black could push through and cut on the other side. So partly this depends on the ladder when black plays here.
Sure.
And obviously the ladder is not going to be good for black in this position. So that's one reason why it could be okay for white. So black pushes on the top. That makes sense. White extends. And now black can push through and cut. Because now if white captures that stone, it's going to be the same position where black's given white the one stone. But obviously it's good for black because of this exchange here, where black has played a useful move and white has played just a hopeless move. Bad. Right. It's just bad for white. So this is going to be good for black. So black can afford to cut on the outside, and this time white's going to connect. So this is the exception to the rule that I was talking about before. All of these little rules of thumb that we have almost always have an exception. And so black plays the attachment.
The nose to Suji.
The nose to Suji. It's the attachment on the nose of the demon, is the Japanese phrase that we use to talk about it.
How do you say it in
Japanese? It's a tengu, is a kind of a demon. It's it's in between a spirit and a demon. It's something living in the woods, you might think.
Yeah, very cool.
And it has a very long nose. And so that's in Japanese literature. It's a Japanese culture thing. And it has a long nose, so that nose is worth punching on the top. So that's where the name came.
Viewers need to pay attention because there'll be a test on these things later. So,
so obviously, if white pushes through here, then this is bad for white because the corner is not yet alive. White needs another corner alive. So white goes down. So this is exactly the shape that we used to have. And we were saying that this is painful for white because white is getting squeezed a little bit.
Yeah.
All these stones low, close to the edge of the board. It's supposed to be bad for white. But it turns out that the computers programs are giving this still giving white a fairly good score.
Really?
And
So it looks so
partly this is because
constricted.
white, in an even game, white is going to start with a good score. All of the computer programs, or just about all of them, have a default of 7.5 points Komi.
Okay.
So white has a big Komi, and white always has an advantage. They also have start with white having something like 54% winning percentage.
Okay.
And so that's still there in this position, according to the computers, and it's
Right.
something that I don't really understand. I don't really agree with it, but I don't like this.
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, I don't think you like it, right? I mean, it just feels very constricted for white, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, the only reason I can find to justify that is that black's wall is those marked white stones are filling all of the underside liberties of black's wall.
Okay.
It means that black's wall is actually not quite as strong as you might imagine. For instance, let's just get rid of those marks and say that, like if this exchange here was not on the board and black had an extra liberty there, I'm pretty sure that the score given by the computers would be very, very different. So having all of those liberties filled, it does actually have a meaning in actual play. It does connect to the actual play, because there's going to be one liberty difference could make a lot of difference in how the various semi-Is and stuff happen. And that stuff does happen with AlphaGo. So white jumps in here. So this is a point where black could have played this move, like black could have played here, and then white would be trying to get into the lower right area. White would be maybe playing this move immediately, trying to do something on this side. So this general area would be where white would be trying to do something. When black plays here, it's a bit more complicated. And the fact that black does have 5 stones in a row there in the upper right, it means it's going to be a bit higher. But white jumps in anyway.
Let me just ask about that. I think some folks, I mean, I would just be inclined to jump right in, but that's, I wonder if is it possible to play away, or is it really this is a time to get in there before?
Well, when you have a moyo like this, every stone that is added to the moyo is going to be very, very valuable.
Right.
And anyone who wants to sort of look into that or question it, you should just look at Takemiya's games, because he's probably the best player in history surrounding moyos. And the way he looks doesn't really look that the way he plays his moyo, it looks very simple, very easy, not necessarily intelligent, because he just keeps adding moves. It seems even a bit redundant. But and I'm talking about his best years, like from the late the late 1980s to the 1990s, I think. When he just started playing Sanrensei, and he would just add moves, plopping them in the middle of the board sometimes, and it didn't really seem to be that practical. But by the time the opponent realized it, it was just too late to dive in quite often.
Right.
And he seemed to be a bit conservative in the way he surrounded the territory. He seemed to be very taking less than he needed to. But it was his judgment of the position was good enough that it was usually good enough. And actually, this kind of position where black has a big wall there is a position where a lot of people could easily go wrong. And he would always connect up to the wall. And the thing about this wall black has in the upper right is that black's wall doesn't have 2 eyes. It's not alive.
Right.
So it's very important for black to be keeping this wall connected to the general structure. So like if white comes in high, black's still going to try to curl around on the top. When white comes down low, some people would be tempted to try to kill that white group. But when white gets out with something like this, it's going to be trouble for black's wall. It's not necessarily clear whether black is going to be attacking here.
Okay.
And this is a point where all those filled liberties that are attached to the wall could become a real problem. And so it's very important for black to be curling around on the outside. And it's also very important that white invades as soon as possible. I think invading a big moyo, it's very difficult to choose the best point, but you want to try to find an invading point as soon as possible, just because it's going to get more and more difficult. And like the left side of the board, you could say for the time being it doesn't even matter. Like it's never going to be big enough to make up for moves that black plays in the middle of the moyo.
Right.
So that's yeah. I probably got carried away, but that's my comments on moyo.
No, I think it's a big question because I think that there's people who will jump in right away, and there's a question of where you jump in, and there's other people who will take a little bit more of a patient approach. And as you were saying, it can just that opportunity can vanish very quickly.
Well, I would go back a bit to White's move, the 3-3 point actually, and say
Really?
that this is already a point where when I was a young man and I came to Japan, it was the general idea is that White would just not let the moyo happen in the start.
Right,
So White would
right.
be playing. White would be playing usually here. So just to split the moyo,
Right.
make sure it doesn't get too big.
Right.
So White's already playing a pretty radical sequence here, allowing the moyo to happen. But when Black does get a moyo like this, which is already covering what looks like a third of, well, almost half of the board. Like if you drew a line from Black's wall in the upper right to the stone, the approach stone in the lower left, then you would have more than half of the board.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen if you let Black play 2-3 more moves in the general area. So anything that White does on the left side, although those moves up on the left side, like this is supposed to be one of the biggest opening points on the board.
I was thinking.
Yeah, where would Black play? I'm not sure. Black could just add a move to the center of the moyo here, and like just one more move, and it's going to start looking pretty difficult for White to jump in. Now, and if you can erase this moyo, then you would have done a better job to do it earlier anyway. If you're good enough to erase this, so this is
he said
this
doubtfully.
is the point where White wants to jump in. And when White jumps in now, White actually has a lot of possibilities, a lot of options. So Black plays on top. And so this is where it gets a bit exciting, because this is where we see this move again.
Oh, I was hoping for the wedge.
The wedge, the ladder doesn't work. So with the let's do that. So if White wedges, let's first look at this variation. Let's look at this variation first. Just playing the hane. And Black extends. White will have no trouble making a line.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting something like this. This peep here is actually strengthening Black's connection in the center. But when this happens, there's a cutting point there. So Black doesn't really have to worry about getting cut off. So you can see that this stone does have a little bit. It's sort of ensuring the cut at this point. And so White can easily live, and Black will just extend here. Black's getting enough thickness to make up for losing the right side. So the lower right area is going to be more and more difficult for White to jump into, and now Black has a lot of influence towards the center. So this would probably be a slight advantage for Black. So the wedge doesn't really work in this case, because even if Black does this, it's not going to be much better. Like it would be something like this. Actually, it's a little more cramped than the other variation. Because in the other variation, just to show you that again, attaching here was a good move, actually. And so White got a little bit extra space by playing the attachment there. So actually, wedging is not a good idea. And of course, Black could cut underneath also, and the ladder is going to be bad for White. And it's going to be difficult to find a way to sort of squeeze through there in between. White would like to save this stone, this one here, but it's going to be difficult to get out into the center from this move.
Okay.
So it doesn't quite work this kind of time. So playing this variation is the sort of the automatic one that springs to mind. This one that I was showing you, where White lives, but actually Black is getting enough thickness. So that's what I would be thinking of doing. So even I was a bit surprised by this move, but it's very logical.
Okay, explain.
Because it's going to connect up. So first of all, if White gets into the corner, like say Black does something like this, then for the time being, White's going to sacrifice the right side. So that's a big corner that White can afford. Like this is a kind of a joseki position. But in this case, it's going to be good enough for White just to live in the corner. That's a big corner. And it started out being a black corner. So that's one threat. So black played here. Locally, this is the strongest move. Like if black plays something like this, then white would be able to do something like this. It would be a completely different game, but white would be switching to invading the lower right area and would be thinking of sacrificing that stone on the right side. So black plays the strongest move. And as I was saying in game 31, what white is doing here is white is looking to play a hane towards the wider side. And so in this case, it's going to be the right side. But white switches to this side. And it's really funny seeing AlphaGo switching back and forth. But every time white adds a stone, the value of the upper right area compared to the lower right area, it's gradually changing. So every time there's a stone added, it changes the value. It increases the value of the local area. It means that if white had played theoretically, I'm not really sure of this, but like if white plays here at this point, then the right side area, the upper right area of the right area, becomes more and more valuable. Theoretically, it's probably too big now for white to be thinking of sacrificing that. So, like if after black plays here, if white starts doing stuff like this, there would be a stronger possibility it would be a failure for white when black does something like this. And that would just be one extra bad exchange for white, one extra bad move in this exchange that white has played here. So the fact that white added a stone there is making those stones on the right side heavy. And the same can be said of this stone. Once white plays here, white's committed to doing something in the lower right corner. And so the balance of white's jumping back and forth here, it's feasibly explained by the fact that white is trying to keep these two areas which can be connected. We're going to see that they can be connected up. But white wants to keep the value of these two areas equal, so that white has the opportunity to keep to link them up. So because of the fact that this move white has just played, this move here is the second move that white plays in the lower right area. It makes it about equal to the size of these two stones. So like, for instance, to give a variation for that, if black plays here now, black's standing to lose a lot more in the lower right corner.
Wow. So
this would be okay for white. And so that's comparing to, let's see if I can find it. That's comparing to the case where black has played here and here. It's okay for white in this case, but like if white has played this exchange first and then white does that, let's see, I'm getting lost. If white plays this exchange first and then does that, then there's a real possibility the right side, the white's loss on the right side is bigger. But the fact that white is playing one move alternatively on each side, it means that now the lower right corner is big enough that black has to answer it.
Okay. I mean, it seems like a real sort of tightrope balancing act that white is doing.
Exactly. And it's just that we have two hot spots here happening at the same time. And white is trying to link them up. And in order for that to work, white has to be conscious throughout of the possibility that black will just take the other hot spot. So they have to be of equal value. So again, it's sort of hard to explain it in human terms, but it does work.
I get the feeling. Yeah, I get the feeling of it. I'm not sure I'd have the nerves of steel.
In human, it would take a lot of reading, and it would you wouldn't be sure of your assessment of the position sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it difficult. And so this is black's standard way of playing in the lower right corner. And again, I was telling you to go back to this move. For instance, if we compare it to white playing here and here, then white would not want to be playing this exchange because it just fills the white liberty. It would be a bad exchange. So that's comparable to what we have happening in the game because white has, you could say that white has filled an extra liberty. when this happens. And these two stones, white would rather they're not on the board.
Right.
But of course, since white started with that attachment on the star point, there's no way white could avoid that. And the fact that white is now facing towards the right side is the justification for the way white played. So white slides. So this is the move.
I was thinking the slide. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the move that links up the two groups.
Okay. Okay.
So black has a number of choices. In the game, black played a Kosumi.
Okay.
I think attaching looks a bit dangerous. Like white could push through and cut here. And it would be difficult for black to save those two stones.
Yeah.
So that looks a bit dangerous.
Okay. All right.
Cutting here is feasible. If black
Okay.
cut here, white would answer once. And it would be something like this. So white gets to connect up the two groups and has a nice little territory there. It would be okay for white. It would be playable.
Right.
So black plays the Kosumi. And white is going to switch back to the right side after playing this. Yes. So black covers, and white is cut off here. White's cut off. But white does get to cut once. And, some people would just automatically play the Atari.
Yeah. Like me. Definitely. Automatically.
We're going to find that there's a very good
right,
reason not to play it. It's a very important. It's going to change things pretty much. It's going to be a bit subtle, but it's going to be a big difference that white has not played this start.
All right.
So white plays here,
Okay.
and we can see white is heading towards a living shape on the right side. And here we are. So in this position, I'm going to start by showing you how white would usually make a life.
Okay.
And then we're going to see the game move. So usually white would just extend here.
Right.
And white has sente. White has a living shape in sente. So black can peep here. And it's the same. Like even if black crawls here, white can cover, and black will end up connecting on the first line. So that's no problem. White has an eye on the right side, and we'll be able to play one more move to make the eye in the center. White has to be worried about black wedging at this point, so white will have to add more stone.
Yeah. Right.
But
show people why that's not an eye.
Okay. Well, it is an eye, but like if we ignore the fact that white has a forcing move here, it's an eye. But like if white plays here, then this is how black would take away white's eye. And an actual play, just having to, the fact that white has to play this move at some point would be a bit painful anyway. Losing a lot in the corner. It's going to make a big difference when black extends here, and white's going to eventually have to, later on in the game, white's going to have to add a stone here, maybe. So it could get to be a bit too painful.
Right.
So I would expect that at this point, white would probably add a stone to the corner, and then there would be no problem. So this would be okay for white. It's a bit better for black not to do it that way, but just to play the Kosumi. Allow white to live. And at this point, black still has a lot of options. Like I've marked up a bit. Black has a forcing move at A, which is the same thing. It's the same Tetsuji that we were seeing just now, which takes away white's eye, and white would have to add a stone to the right side. So black has some extra security in the center there, because we have to remember there is a cutting point here. The cutting point here is pretty important to white. So the fact that black can push white around a bit here by attaching at A is going to make a big difference to that. It's going to give some extra security to black. And as I was showing you in the other variation where black started with this move, in this position also, black can accomplish the same connection with a play at B. In some cases, let's just do it with stones on the board. Like in some cases when black gets a stone here, and we have something like this happening, then sometimes black will be able to crawl here. And this is a stronger attack because now this is going to be dying. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And in actual play, white would be able to save the group by playing here. But you can see that the cutting stones are going to be taken off. And white will connect to the corner. Or black. So there, you can see that there's a lot of opportunities that black will have to make some kind of a trade. In this case, black would still be have the option to capture the 2 stones in the center, because we would have something like this happening.
Mm.
And white would live on the side, and black would have a lot of extra profit in the center, capturing those two stones, getting rid of the potential cut here, and all of that. So you can see that black has a lot of options left to happen after playing this exchange. And black will just leave it for the time being. And so it's going to be slightly better than what we see in the game, because white's going to cleanly live. White's going to have a much cleaner life in the game. So we're going to see how that, we're going to go back to this point in the game. And I was showing you white just extending here. And it looked good for the time being because white had Senta and was alive, but the game is going to be better. So white plays this unreasonable looking move.
Yeah, gee whiz.
And white has a co-threat. It's really important. White gets to play here. And this ko looks really big, but the Atari here is bigger.
Wow.
So if black just takes here, this is it solves all of white's problems. And it's actually bigger. All of those ponukis, they're right next to a big black wall. So they're not as important as you might think.
Right.
And white has a complete living shape there. And you have to remember that this half of the group was cut off and floating in the center. So that's really that white is connected up and lived here. So this would actually be good for white. Black has to answer it. And a human player would have to be expecting to play this move in order to justify not playing that Atari, the mark point. So it's something that takes some foresight. You have to be ready for this to happen.
Wow.
And also, you can probably expect that even AlphaGo, in a way, did some human-like reasoning and at least read out that variation and had the expectancy that would want to play this move as a co-threat. So you can. This is a position where I'm in. At least the result I'm seeing is that AlphaGo is handling a ko very skillfully. And if we go back to the time when AlphaGo was playing Lee et al., I remember that we were wondering how much AlphaGo was understanding kos, because it seemed to be avoiding kos at the time.
Well, it's an interesting, point in Go. I mean, humans have trouble understanding kos. I mean, part of a ko is calculating, which AlphaGo, of course, is good at. But what's, from a professional standpoint, what's another sort of, issue about kos?
Well, kos are it's a point where the mapping of the whole board is going to change drastically.
Right.
And almost always you can say that ko is going to involve a local loss. So you have to be able to face the fact that you're going to take a huge local loss. And you're going to be taking a profit elsewhere, just like in this trade that I was showing here.
Right.
And so you have to be able to assess the difference. So this is something that is always pretty difficult because actually this is a fairly subtle advantage for white. It's not as if the game is over. The game is going to continue. And quite often for humans, it's more difficult to assess these positions where the territories have changed places so drastically. You have to start from scratch. You're not relying on the previous assessment of the board position. So it's not a position where you can say, like, I played a good opening, so this should be about even. You can't reason that way. You have to actually assess it as a new position. And that can be a bit difficult.
Right. I think particularly for amateur players, there's an emotional attachment to the stones. Yeah.
So all of those white stones in the upper right area, they're really painful in a way. But the right side is bigger, and it's just like it's this trade that I showed you. In many kos, you would have to think about the trade like if black had a good ko-threat at this point. Black doesn't have any good ko-threats, so that makes it simple. But if black had a good ko-threat, then that would be another trade that you would have to think about. But for instance, a ko-threat like this it's pretty obvious that this would not be good enough for black because the upper right area is just a disaster area.
Oh, God,
this is one of the easy ones.
Right.
So, but in many kos, you would have a fairly difficult assessment if black had a good co-threat at this point, or if the ko was not so big. It's a dangerous ko for black, so black probably has to disconnect.
Yeah.
Now, by forcing to get back to the actual game, in forcing with this move, forcing black to connect there, the exchange of this move for this. So let's mark them here. This exchange is going to be surprisingly valuable. And I'm going to show you why. Because the game continues. White now connects the ko. White doesn't have a second ko threat. And black extends. And white is alive on the right side. But this stone here, let's mark it again. This stone here has a direct meaning in making white alive. It's necessary to have that white stone there. So it's making a big difference. And just to go back to this variation, we can look at it again, where black had all of those various possibilities to molest white a little bit. Most of them are going to be gone. So let's get back to the game. White connects, and black plays here. We can see that this stone, let's unmark that one, and mark this stone now. This stone, although it's captured, white is getting some extra potential from forcing from outside. I'm going to talk about that a bit later when I've marked the board. So this way, yeah. So white has sente to escape in the center.
Okay.
And the stone at A has gives white forcing moves at B or C, which can be come into use later in the game. White didn't actually use that stone that way in the actual game because it got very, very, very tactical in the lower right area. And white didn't have time to play forcing moves like B or C. But if the game had become relatively calm, then white would be using, for instance, the peep at B would be really annoying. This one. When this would just give white all sorts of potential, like, for instance, ideas to cut here. And we have to remember, now the black stones on the right are in danger. And these stones, although they're captured, these two white stones are not cutting stones when we're talking about this black group on the right. So that's one thing that could happen. Otherwise, if black wants to stop that from happening, when white, let's see, this is the one I was doing. If black wants to connect up, black would have to be doing something like this. And you could see when the game is relatively calm and the upper side is important enough, this could be a very big gain for white. And also the whole black wall there is losing its eye space.
Yeah.
So there are some very annoying peeps here that white has. And sometimes it's going to be C. That would be annoying too. And when white plays at C, black's probably going to answer here. So locally it's no problem. But you can see white is getting forcing moves. This time white has forced from the center. So it depends on maybe having a big left side would make this useful for white. So there's some potential there in that marked stone. And also let's unmark that again and remark this one. This stone is going to have a direct effect on white's life on the right side because when black plays here. So the local move for black is to play here and cut and this way. So this is an example of how that white stone is going to come into play because this is the tsumego tesuji that sometimes works. But we can see in this case it's not working. And it's just that stone again.
Oh, that's so cool.
And at this point, the one stone here would be a false eye. So later on, it is not going to be forcing. But it is, having it on the board to start with is very important here. So that's an example of how if white did not have that stone a day, black would have had an opportunity to kill white. So it's a very important stone. Okay, we're back in the game variation here. But that was a very important game stone there that gave white a living shape.
Got it.
So black plays the slide. And that's just about white extends here. White has to extend here to make a fully living shape. And now white's alive. So you can see it's a much more comfortable life than it was before. And also the added value that white has key points like this. When white peeps here, again, this is potentially a vital point in black's shape. And also, as I was saying before, white has these peeps from outside.
Right.
So there's some extra value in doing that double hane. All has to do with this double hane that white played here. And the fact that white had an extra ko-threat left behind.
So let me ask this then. So White has not only lived, rather comfortably on the side, but the other thing I was worried about was that, that clump of stones, and the, white stones on the lower side, and looks like he's managing them as well. So what did Black get out of this?
Well, for the time being, Black didn't get enough back.
Yeah.
So Black's going to have to attack now in the lower right area.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to make the game very exciting because Black is going to attack strongly.
Oh, no beating around the bush on that one.
And for the time being, White's not really connected there. That 3-space jump there is a bit too far away. And I think that you could say the idea was that White is offering to sacrifice those 6 stones if White can get some forcing moves from the outside. So Black is saying, no way, I'm not just going to take the 6 stones. So White plays here. This is the game move. And it's a very aggressive approach to trying to save the White group. It's a dangerous move, and it's going to make the game very exciting. But first of all, just to show you what the idea is, if Black just simply answers like this, White's going to, you can see that this is connecting the Knight's move there. Having this stone here is stopping Black from doing stuff like, for instance, it would be a let's see, it would almost be a ladder breaking move, but for instance, if Black does stuff like this, White could just pull back and be connected. Well, in this case, this is probably good enough. It's a very tactical position, so like I probably shouldn't be casually making variations like that because it's very dangerous. But it does have an effect of connecting the game. And also when this kind of thing happens, it's going to make a difference to White's eye shape. You can see that White is starting to get some eye shape now. And it would be relatively easy for White to handle this group. So I would say this is good for White. So this is where White played, and this was the game move. So like Black is just sort of disregarding the connection of Black's stones and attacking all out. So if White captures the 1 stone here, Black will just sacrifice it and come from outside.
Wow.
And this is actually going to be a bit too dangerous for White because White can, that marked White stone, the fact that it's in Atari makes it very difficult for White to counterattack.
That's right.
So White could maybe get a ko with ABC, but White wouldn't have a matching ko threat. Like, let's just do that variation. Like if White plays here, like White attacking here would not be good enough. Just the lower right area is just too big now. And White doesn't really have an easy way of capturing that wall anyway. And like a move like this would save the White group. But this would just be, Black would be getting so much on the outside that this would be playable for Black. You can see the lower right area is mostly Black's territory. There's a ko there if White plays, but Black would just ignore that. If Black plays here, the lower side is getting pretty big too. So I'd say this is good for Black. So White doesn't have any ko threats. So when Black plays here, it looks like White's in trouble, but White just plays on top. So actually, White's offering to sacrifice that 1 stone, but White's going to be getting a connection in the process. For instance, if Black pushes through here, then White gets to play here. And you can see White's sort of making shape. Something like this could happen. And when White gets to play the shape move here, this is sort of breaking up Black's shape. And if Black, we say, it's difficult to say what Black will play here, but if Black just plays a mundane move like this, we can see that the Black wall in the upper right area is not 100% alive either. So this could be okay. And White has an eye. Sort of has an eye in this area. It's not complete yet, but it's, White has potential to get. So at this point, I would say White has half an eye in this general central area, somewhere or other. It's not really defined yet.
Technically, it's somewhere in there.
Yeah. So Black plays on the outside. So this is the game move, and this is just going 100%. It's completely going after the White. It's just like it's saying you're dead, and it's very dangerous for White. Like I would be a bit anxious at this point if I was playing with
I
black.
am totally
Well, I'd
anxious.
be anxious playing with black too, I suppose. So white cuts here. This is the obvious move, but it's not going to make eyes for white. So now black adds yet one more move to the outside. White doesn't have room for two eyes. It's going to be dead.
Yeah.
Another key point. Like this looks like a very effective attack for black.
Death in the Kasumi, the double Kasumi.
Yeah. So white plays here. Now this is sort of threatening to make a life. So if black, this is the game move. Black. So black has played all of the vital eye-taking points here with A, B, and C.
Point out we've had two Kasumis and we now have a bamboo joint. I love it. This is all shape.
This is all very strong attacking shape. Like when you're attacking your opponent, you don't want to have holes in your shape. Like you can be slow. You can afford to be slow because white's cornered. And so black has very solid shapes. It's an example of a good attack. So obviously black's going to lose because it's AlphaGo. But yeah. So white makes an eye here. This is actually, if black plays on the outside, white's about to make a living shape. So I'll show you that one. If black plays on the outside here, white can, this is going to be forcing against the corner. And in the variation I made, I had black answer. So now white just can make an eye on the outside. And this is alive. Like if black plays in the center, let's do that one too. If black plays in the center, then white connects there. White has an eye on, well, white can connect, white can crawl, I guess. Yeah, maybe crawling is better. So white has another eye there. So that's two eyes. So in the variation I made, I had black play on the side. Now white gets an eye in the center. So that's alive. It's just alive. And trying to avoid that is a bit unreasonable for black. So I gave the more reasonable variation. So that's one way. And just to go back to white playing that Hanesugi in the corner, if black plays away, black doesn't really want to play a ko here, but there's no way to avoid, even if black backs off, there's still going to be a ko here. So there's no way to avoid that, basically. And white would have ko threats on the outside now. So black plays in the corner. So that makes sense. Now white sort of has an eye. Like this point here is probably going to be an eye. But one eye is not going to be enough. So white jumps out. And black is still going to try to surround white. So this is looking at black A to cut at B. So there's an actual threat there. Did I make a variation? I actually didn't make a variation for black cutting immediately. But like if black cuts here, probably not so good for black because white breaks through at this point. So the idea here is that if black plays here, and if white extends, black's going to be able to do that. And this would actually be good for black. This in itself is a bit complicated, but the fact that black has a wedge at D, it's going to give black a distinct advantage.
Yeah, white's in trouble.
White's in trouble. You know, I actually went to this in pretty much detail. It gets really exciting when white plays here. I think the reason I didn't do that was because it was really going to be hard to understand.
Okay.
But the point is that when black does cut here, I think black can actually cut immediately. That white group on the right with all those bamboo joints is a lot shorter in liberties than you might think.
Yeah.
So it's very low in liberties. So black.
I didn't read it, but it's what it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that drop down is sort of instinctive to try and capture black, but it's just too slow.
Okay, so we saw white extending and black cutting white here. So obviously that bamboo joint is a kind of a semi-forcing move that white has. So that's what we see happening here. This is going sort of in association with the bamboo joint. So black plays here, white plays here. Now it's different. So if black does the same thing, it's going to crash pretty quickly because white's going to get a double Atari here.
Oh.
So that innocent little exchange of this stone for this stone is making a big difference.
That is very clever.
And white wants to cut also. White wants to continue from this move to cut black. but white starts with extending in the center. So this time black's just going to wedge. Connects, and white connects. And okay, black plays here. Let's see, I made a variation. Okay, cutting here. Obviously, there's the question of what happens if black cuts here. White will play an Atari, push through. Pushing through here, it's threatening a double cut. And black really has a headache as to how to answer that. Like if black, the variation that I showed is black connecting here. If black connects here, then white gets to make eyes here. And again, you can see it's a pretty bad shape for black. It's a clump of stones. So black connects here. But now white's going to be able to make eyes from this side. So if black connects here, now that's just a squeeze. So black would continue here, white here. Now this is actually very, very bad for black because the
oh my God,
the outside is in trouble too. But the fact that white has saved the group is the most important point.
Yeah.
And so black cannot cut there. That's the conclusion. Black cannot cut. Black plays here, and white plays this move, forcing again from the outside. This is a point where white could have cut here. This would be a completely different game. And black cuts here. This leads to a fight on the lower side. Let's see what variation I made. So it's like this. It looks like black's going to win the semi-idol. So this would be a trade. It's actually a surprisingly close game. Because white's lost the whole group in the lower right. But the lower side area is going to be white territory. And white still has those forcing moves at B, for instance. And white might start from A. That's why I have an A there also. Also, there's potential for white to squeeze black in the center. And so black's going to have to be careful about that the potential semi-eye there. Black's going to have to be careful about it. The semi-eye on the lower side is going to be an easy win for black. So black's going to win that fight. But white does have some potential to eventually be squeezing black a little as white gets stones here, and then white could play something like this to stop the Watari. Black would win the semi-eye, but like this mark point here, white has potential to squeeze from the left side. I was surprised to find that this is actually fairly close. So this was not the game move, but it's one way white could have done it. In the game move, white is sort of trying to save everything. And this is the game move that I don't understand. So I'm going to say that as far as I understand, maybe this was the losing move because it doesn't make sense to me. So I'll probably be corrected by a computer someday. But for the time being, I'm saying this is the losing move.
Okay.
So this is what I'm suggesting. White does eventually have to connect that point. And black, this is going to resemble the actual game. The game was like this anyway, and white captured the one stone. And then black played here. Black ends up playing in the center. So this position, which is the game position, and this position are very similar. The difference being that black is thrown into A and white has captured at B. Obviously a bad exchange for black. This bad exchange, where black has lost a stone at A, is actually much more important than you might think. It looks like it's just another false eye.
Right.
And the variations to come, we're going to see that false eye turn into a real eye to give white two eyes. We're going to see that a number of times. Just remember it for the time being. You're going to see it. You're going to believe it when it happens.
All right.
So to go back to this point, black cut here and white chased it. If black escapes, again we have a very similar thing. White's going to push through here, and black doesn't have a good point to connect. Wherever black connects, black's going to be filling his own liberties. So black probably connects here, and again we can see white squeezing to make a life. White escapes. Black has to back off, obviously. If black connects here, the white just captures the whole thing. So black backs off, and white has saved the group. So this is good enough for white. So that's the idea that shows you that although black is cut here, when white plays an Atari, black cannot escape the one stone. So it's really strange that black cut there to start with. Black needed this stone. So that's the reasoning behind my variation where black starts with this. And if white plays in the center, then black's going to be able to cut. So like if white does something like this, now black can cut. And this time, with the extra stone there, it's not going to be the same squeeze. So this time it's going to be okay for black.
Sure.
So in the game, black did sacrifice that one stone. I showed you why black could not play here.
Right.
Live. So black escaped. White takes. Black's still trying to kill the white group. And black surrounds from, and it's still in trouble. It's still looking very dangerous. So white pushes through. This point is still a forced sequence. White cuts here and cuts. So finally white gets to play this cut. And there's still a lot of fights to capture, a lot of semi-eyes involved here. Black connects, white extends. So what happens now? This is the game.
Yeah, this is exciting. Wow.
What if black plays here? Turns out that even if black plays here, there's still an issue in the center. So white will play this one. Black can actually live on the side. In the process, though, white gets to capture here.
Okay.
Black has a forcing move there, so I'm showing you how black can live on the side. Black has an eye with Sente on the side, and the potential to capture this one white stone here.
Gotcha.
Black has two eyes. Okay. So black actually managed to make a living shape. In this position, white had enough liberties on the outside here that black had to aim to live here instead of trying to make a semi out of it, instead of trying to capture the white group. So that was okay for black locally. You can see black is losing some points on the lower side. Now white's going to connect here. And this is a headache because white has a forcing move here. Black's group in the center can potentially get into trouble.
Oh, I see. Then there's a ladder.
Sometimes there's a ladder. It depends on how much white can force in the center. It's going to be a lot worse for black than that variation I was showing you before. And so if black connects here, then the center is going to be safe. But again, the reason I made this variation is because it's another example of how white can make two eyes. So white plays here. And in this position, black is out of liberties, and white has two eyes. So at this point, this would be a turning point when white plays here. Does black want to try to go after white? And as I was saying, this gets really, really complicated. But part of it is the fact that this black group on the right side is not alive either. And even now, the ladder is favoring white, so white can escape here too. Black has three groups to deal with. This black group in the upper right corner is not alive. And if white, at some point, white's going to maybe do something like this and do something like this. If white gets to this vital point, this is a very important point on the second line here, as far as the fight to capture is concerned. If white gets to play this point, then white's going to win the fight to capture.
Okay.
Provided white's position on the outside holds.
Right.
So the fact that black at this point has this move, that means that white's going to continue in the center with this move for a while. And black has a huge headache dealing with that group in the center, the two groups in the center also.
Wow.
And the fact that any move in this area, any move around here is going to be a forcing move against the black group in the upper right corner. White has sufficient liberties in that dead group to make all of this possible.
This is a pretty hellacious reading.
Provided white plays this point, white's going to win the semi. That's the basic. So that gives white these extra forcing these extra forcing opportunities in the center of the board. You can imagine I spent a lot of time.
I can imagine. Wow.
So that's so black doesn't really have a good way to deal with the center. Like I was doing it with this move. This move here, it's sort of problematic too. It's the fact that white always has the squeeze here. It's going to make a big difference. That this squeeze is just going to give black such terrible shape in the center. So even though I was saying that this is kind of a forcing move that white has, it's probably better for black to take that course than to have that potential squeeze there. So that's why I was doing the variation with this move. In the game, black protected the lower side. We can see that in that variation I was showing you, white squeezed black a lot on the lower side. Also, this makes a difference in white's eyes. In this variation here, in regard to the eye that white was making here, just for argument's sake, in this position, let's have white be doing something. Let's say white could do something similar in the center and get this forcing move and make what looks like two eyes. In this position, black still has this eye breaking technique here.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be a false eye. Yes. So if we go back to that variation I was showing you, in the process of living, black had to give white this move here, which makes that extra eye a safe eye when white does get to that position. When white does get into this kind of position, it's a real eye now. So this move here is an important move that white is getting in the process of squeezing black on the lower side. So this move black played here on the lower side, not only is it making this lower side group safe and getting maybe about 10 points territory there, it's also actually taking away white's second eye in a lot of the variations that happen in the center of the board. So now it's not quite so simple for white to make a second eye there. In the game, white pushed through here. Oh yeah, that's the variation I was just showing you. So white pushed through here, obviously. This is getting really, really dangerous for black too. White moves out, and black is escaping. Okay, so we have a lot of weak groups here.
Yes, we do. Oh man!
And you can see it's still sort of depending on the point that white plays this move. This is going to be a key move in all of the variations, connecting here and looking at the potential squeeze to make two eyes in the center. That's always going to come up. So white attaches here, and still white's threatening black in the center. White's 4 stones here. Let's mark the 4 white stones. These stones are actually pretty strong. Not only does white have that cut there in the center, if white extends here, this is usually going to be forcing against black in the center. So there's a lot of potential there for those stones. They're pretty strong for the time. So white's leaning against black group on the lower side and trying to catch the black group in the center of the board. Obviously, if all of this fails for white, if black finds some way to survive, then the white group in the lower right area is going to die. So that the life of that group depends on white finding something here. And this is the tesuji here. So in the game, black just went down. If black cuts here, then it's going to get a bit more exciting when white does this. And this is a direct threat. For instance, if black extends here, white would just grab the stones in the center. That would be easy. Right. So black takes. Even so, white gets to connect there with sente. And something like this would happen. And again, it would be, white would have sufficient strength there with that capture day and a potential 2 eyes there to go after black's stones in the center. So black goes down. That makes sense. It seems submissive, but it's just not giving white the extra momentum that white gets otherwise. So black plays here. Again, white's harassing black a little bit. And now this exchange that white did, although it looks like white's just trying to take away black's eyes, this is setting up white's life on the right. Because we can see these black stones. Oh, I'm pointing to them on the screen, so I better mark them. These black stones.
Right.
They're losing their extra liberties. And we're going to see that work to give white. I was showing you how the potential eye that white was trying to make here, how it could be a false eye. White's taking away that opportunity from black. So it's getting a bit complicated here. But black is alive on the lower side. And now white connects at A. So it's the damezmari of these 5 stones is giving white an extra eye. Like if black pushes through here, for the time being, black can handle that. But when white does this variation, you can see, this is just not working. Black runs out of liberties. So we can see that now, just because white got, let's do the living variation where black backs off and white makes the second eye. The fact that white got a stone here, it took away that opportunity for black to make that a false eye.
Mm-hmm.
So that, just to show you again, the variation that I was talking about there is, for instance, if we have white do something like this, then I was showing you a variation where black could extend here and cut here to make it a full side.
Right.
But this forcing move that white got by playing here took away that opportunity for black, and so it's giving white's second eye. So again, it all depends on white connecting here, and black connecting on the left there. But we can see that the position in the center is critical enough that black probably does have to connect on the left. So to go back to the game, white connects, and black did not. Black played on this side. It's going to be the same story because white plays here. Oh, not quite yet. AlphaGo never keeps it simple.
Of course not.
Let's just go make a variation for white here. So when white plays at this point, and black answers that, black has to answer that, and say white gets to play this forcing move. Already we see that white is safe because this is threatening to make two eyes. If black takes away the two eyes, again, white can do something here, and black doesn't have time to kill that because of black's lack of liberties. So it's the same idea. So in the game, black played here, but it's not killing white. It's not a successful move. Already white has a way to survive. So now it's just white punishing black. At this point, it gets a bit ugly because black's really in trouble. White plays the forcing move here.
I'm sorry. So just go back to the black move where black extends off of the was it? Yeah, this one. So if that's not actually working, why play it?
At this point, black doesn't have any winning move. It's sort of like game 4 with AlphaGo against Lisa et al. It doesn't have any winning move.
Gotcha.
It's probably very low percentages at this point.
I see. Okay. All right.
So it still wants to kill that group, you might say. If we allow AlphaGo to have an emotion, I would say.
Okay, that's what I was sort of getting at, which is I was feeling sort of as a human player, I was like, I'm still going to try and kill it. Maybe you'll make a mistake and it'll die, but it's AlphaGo, so that's not going to happen.
I think when it does the calculation, that probably, when it's losing anyway, that probably gives it a better percentage. But I like to say that it wants to kill that white group.
Okay.
Yeah. So white plays here. And you can see this black group is in a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
So at this point, again, white's play is a bit... I would say that white's play also is not always precise when white is going to win anyway. Because it doesn't have to kill black to win.
Right.
And so sometimes it's... And I was remarking about this in the games that Master played against humans on the internet. From the human point of view, AlphaGo is not always precise when it's winning anyway. It doesn't bother to play the best move sometimes.
It gets a little generous.
Well, playing precisely can be dangerous if you make a mistake afterwards. So that could have an effect on the percentages. So instead of playing that forcing move here, which would simplify things, strangely, AlphaGo starts with this move. It's the same mechanics. So like if black tries to kill white, white does have this forcing move. So if black answers, let's do it my way. Oh, sorry. I didn't intend to do that. Let's just get back to the position here. If black plays here, and I made the variation with black connecting on the right. But let's do this one. If black connects here, again, it's the same story. White gets to live with this. And black has to back off. So white's alive. So that's the idea here. In this variation I've shown, this time I showed black playing the connection on the right. And white will play Atari here, and attaching is the Tetsuji.
Nice.
So, at this point, there's a number of ways white can still capture black somehow in the center, but this is the most satisfying way. So if black pushes through here, obviously pushing through here is immediately going to make it a ladder.
Yeah, crash. Yeah.
That's a ladder.
Yeah.
So black pushes through this way, and white plays another geta. And at any point, if black pushes through here, black's going to run out of liberties. and this is just going to be a squeeze. So that doesn't work. So black pushes through here. This is the one way that black can survive, but white's going to get that ladder on this side. And even though black has just taken 7 stones, it's not nearly good enough. It's all that territory black lost in the lower right area. Black just has these tiny little living groups. That big blob of stones that black just took in the center is not good enough. You might be surprised. It might look attractive, but it's just not good enough for black.
Wow.
Black doesn't have enough territory. That group in the upper right is not alive yet.
I was going to say, and on top of the icing on the cake is that the black group still it's not alive, which is sort of really annoying.
And white's going to be making the territory from here on.
Yeah.
So that capture in the center of the board actually doesn't have any use as thickness because the rest of the board sort of belongs to white anyway.
But it's heart-shaped, so there's that.
Yeah, there's that, yeah. Like one of Mr. Nakayama's problems, right?
I was just thinking, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So black cuts here. At this point, black is sort of, at this point you could say black has given up on killing white. Because this would be the move that attempts to kill white. As I was showing you, it doesn't really work.
No.
So black, this way black is trying to save the black stones in the center of the board. So adding a stone here is giving them some extra security. It would be no problem for white to simply answer that.
Yeah.
And that would just not change the status of the game. So instead, white plays this move. And again, this is a point where white could have lived with Sente by playing at A and forcing black to play at B. So it's a case, again, where AlphaGo is not playing the optimal moves. It's not playing precisely, as I would say. But it doesn't matter at this point. It's just annoying. So bad. It's just right. That's a great success for white in the lower right area.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go through the game a little bit more. We're going to see a really neat move coming up pretty soon. So white is alive there, and black starts to attack the corner. So at this point, black doesn't have enough territory. Black has something like about 10 points in the lower right corner. That can be something like 12 points at the most, but it can get a lot smaller than that. So it's less than 10 points.
So
let's see, some territory on the lower side. Yeah.
No, if you were black, would you if you were black, would you keep playing?
That's a good question. I probably would have done one of the crashes before at this point. I probably would not allow white to live. I would probably crash in attempting to kill it.
Mm-hmm. Go down in flames.
Because already, although black has some territory that we can see on the lower side in the lower right corner, white's territory in the upper right corner and on the right side. And this living shape in the center of the board is about 5 points too. White has an equal amount of territory, and black's in trouble in the center of the board. I might continue playing. Even AlphaGo didn't last very much longer than this, though.
Okay.
So we get to this point. Black is trying to attack white in the corner, and white plays here. Looks like white's trying to make a life, but then the next move is really beautiful. White plays here.
Oh, yeah, I like it.
Now, this is a point, most people would be tempted to play here, in which case black plays the tar here, and black is completely connected here. The point is, if you're a human player and if you mess up at this point, the result of the game could come into question, actually. It's not that clear cut if white messes up in this local fight.
Okay.
But after white wedges here, it's pretty clear. If black covers here, now white's going to capture one stone. And black gets cut off. This is just a disaster. Black still has
whoa, that is so cool.
It's like magic, isn't it?
I did not see that coming.
White could not cut black. And suddenly now white, it's like one of those rope tricks that magicians.
Yeah. Wow.
It's very, you sort of miss this thing. But it works. Like if black plays from this side, this is bad too. So this is a position where white has 2 forcing moves here. White can play from this side, or white can play from this side. White has two ways to force with that captured stone, well, that stone in the center, and this wedge move makes use of one or the other, depending on how black answers it. Mm. So it's really beautiful, the way that black can be cut off here. And as I was saying, black does have the coed A, but the right side is going to be falling apart.
Wow.
So black connects. So that's settled all of white's problems at no cost. So this was a great success for white. A very beautiful tesuji.
That is just gorgeous.
And then again, white's play very simply in the center of the board and just running away. This is good enough. It's a bit clumsy the way white played it, but white's winning anyway. So we're going to follow through to the end of the game. White's just not doing anything. White had opportunities to be a bit more strongly attacking, but white's just winning anyway. Like black still has something like probably about 30 points of territory. But white has, all of white's territories are pretty close to 10 points. Like that territory on the left side, the territory on the right side is a good territory, close to 10 points. White has a lot more than 10 points in the upper right corner, and the upper left corner is big now too. So although black was attacking, it was white who got all the extra stuff. Oh, I see. Black's captured the 5 stones on the lower side now, so black has a bit more territory too, but it's not going to be enough.
I was wondering because it's a nice capture, but
yeah, it was a nice capture.
It's just not big enough.
It's not big enough. Like black has been attacking, but it's not getting enough out of it.
And so that last play with the C17 is just sort of very picture. Just finish it up.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would be tempted to play one to the right at the D17 point.
Sure.
But it looks like AlphaGo is just being extra careful, making sure nothing happens there.
It's amazing play by white, right? I mean, really, just a lot of, and as you were saying, that the way that played out on the right, the back and the forth, and the back and the forth, walking that tightrope, and then and you went into a bunch of detail, but in terms of the difference. Of how white winds up playing, but it's such a razor's edge that it just makes that huge difference for white, and it's phenomenal. Well, great detective work on your part as usual. It's really amazing, exciting, as you said, very, very exciting. I was extremely nervous, so well. Thank you once again, and of course, thanks to all of our AGA members. We appreciate your support and make these videos and so much more. Not just these videos, but everything that the AGA does possible. So, and if you'd like to support this content and the work that the AGA is doing, do consider joining the American Go Association. We're really proud of it. Go to usgo.org. Just takes a couple of minutes. We appreciate the support, and we will see you all next week.